Gab Talks by the Independent Press Award. I'm your hostess, Gabby Olczak. Today we will be speaking with poet Lee Woodman. Her latest poetry collection, Soulscapes, was awarded a winner for poetry in the 2024 Independent Press Award. Soulscapes is the fifth collection in her Scapes poetry series, which has been the recipient of numerous awards, including a distinguished favorite in poetry in 2023 from the Independent Press Award. She's also the winner of the 2020 William Meredith Prize for Poetry, the 2021 Atlantic Review International Poetry Competition Merit Award, and first prize in Poetry and Prose Contest for Carve Magazine 2022. Her essays and poems have appeared in numerous publications. Lee's debut poetry collection, Mindscapes, was published in 2020. She received an individual poetry fellowship from the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities in 2019 and 2020, and a Virginia Center for the Creative Arts Fellowship in 2022. Lee has a bachelor's of degree in art from Colby College and a master's degree in art education from the Hartford Art School. She has had careers in radio, television, and film production. A lifelong passion for art, theater, music, and words, Lee has held numerous leadership positions at the Smithsonian Institution, the National Museum of American History, and the Library of Congress. She's an award-winning TV, radio, and multimedia producer. As if that weren't enough, Lee also founded Lee Woodman Media, Inc. and launched K-12 Inc., an online education company that now trades on the New York Stock Exchange. Congratulations, Lee, and welcome to the Gab Talks again.
I'm so glad to be here.
It's wonderful to see you. So much to talk about, but Lee, you're a museum pioneer, an educator, an entrepreneur, a writer, and just a huge presence in art and the literary world. You actually came to poetry at the age of 68, and you said that you almost fell out of your chair when you took your first poetry class. Why did it have such a profound impact on you?
I think it had such a profound impact because I was looking for something that combined all of my interests going back to childhood, and that was art, dance, music, and theater. And of course, languages, because I grew up overseas and my first language was French, and then we lived in India. So, those sounds ringing in your ears, you never forget.
Of course.
I retired from the Smithsonian, and a friend of mine said, why don't you go to the Writers Center and take a memoir class? And I looked at the brochure, and the memoir class looked interesting, but there was a poetry class called Transformation. And I thought, wow, that is the perfect title for where I am in life. And I took the first class there with a woman named Judith Harris, who was phenomenal. And I just started right then and there and have never stopped.
Well, we're so glad for that. Can you show it the book? I have it here, but why don't you hold it up a little bit? There we go. Gorgeous cover. So Soulscapes it's rich with human elements. It's simplistically framed from a novice point of view. It's an examination of life, death. You refer to it as a journey toward connection, meaning through imagery and words. But describe, Lee, what Soulscapes means to you.
Okay, it means other ways of looking beyond traditional religions. And I did a lot of research into different ways of thinking, and that would include origin stories, spirit animals, tarot, witchcraft, lucid dreaming, past lives, all of which I didn't know much about, but I wanted to know because I had a clear intuition that all these things basically bring people to the same conclusion. They want to think of something bigger than themselves and feel some kind of oneness with the universe. And we all come to it in different ways.
For sure. All the poetry that you write in all of these series as well as Soulscapes. It's rich with imagery, human elements, as you said, spirit animals, witchcrafts, goddesses. The poems are enlightening. They're often humorous, poignant, and Lulu gave me goosebumps. Can you read that for us and give us some background on that, Lee?
I would love to.
Thank you.
It's really about my father. You know, basically, as he was on the verge of dying, is just within days. And he was a very funny man himself. He loved education. He loved his house on the mountain. He used to leave little notes in the doorways for the raccoons and the deer that were around.
So sweet.
So anyway, here we go. Philly Lulu. My dad was certainly not a scientist, nor accurate in his animal fact reporting, but he had grace and humor. He used to read me fantasies like Alice in Wonderland and made up his own stories about bats and mice. He probably talked to visiting wildlife in New Hampshire. I know he left notes for squirrels at the back door. Once on a road trip, he asked me, how do deer know they shouldn't cross at the moose crossing? Intrigued when he told me that Philly Lulu birds fly backwards, I was pretty sure he meant hummingbirds. But I Googled Philly Lulu to see what I could find. Nothing at all. So I dug into hummingbirds. Scientists note these are nectar-sipping beauties, whirring from flower to flower with agility and grace. With long beaks like hydraulic pumps, they eat beetles, aphids, and mosquitoes, and love sugar liquid in feeders. They recognize bird lovers who create the treat. Over time, they let these humans come near, even perch on their fingers. Many cultures consider hummingbirds spirit animals. Around the world, people view them as healers and messengers to deceased ancestors. If they appear to you in person or in a dream, it is a sacred event, evidence that you are connected with other souls on the astral plane. When my father was fast failing, I remembered something comforting he told me years ago in college. I was floundering in astronomy, upset I would fail. But he said, don't worry, your stars are in the right place. I wonder what he would have thought of my dream of metallic bronze and gold fields, acres of glowing wheat, vibrating wings hovering above, specks of ruby red and shimmering sapphire, mighty little birds. I think he would have been quite sure that whether Philly Lulus or hummingbirds, they brought enchantment and wonder, an air of magic. In hospice, the night before he died, the doctor told him, not much time. Dad replied, Elysian Fields. My sisters and I hovered around like hummingbirds, hearts beating 1,200 times per minute. If I could have told him the birds in the dream were singing wordless songs, I bet he would have said, they can't talk back to you, but their friends will understand. And the truth, as far as Philly Lulus go, they do fly backwards and upside down.
Wow. Just beautifully. Thank you. Many of your poems in Soulscapes begin with a quote or an excerpt that inspired the ensuing poem. This one, of course, was inspired by your father. The breadth of your inspiration is vast. It's, of course, personal, your dad, artists, writers, astronomers, musicians. You have B.B. King, the author E.B. White, my favorite book, Charlotte's Web, Dalai Lama, the Bible. Where do you find your inspiration and how do you compile each series?
great question. Well, each of the books, completely different topics, even though they have Scapes as the ending title. And I choose the topics very specifically. The first one, Homescapes, was about living in France and India while I was young, and not, even though being American, not coming to America until I was 14.
Wow.
And that's adapting from India, big city, hot, to New Hampshire, cold, to a small high school of 33 people in my class. So it's
Wow.
yeah. The Mindscapes one is more about wishes, lies, and dreams from a woman's point of view. And so that calls on some of the things you mentioned: myth, folktale, goddesses, women in the world. And then what seemed to follow right after that was a book called Lifescapes, because it was a lifescape of going through divorce and separation and COVID. And that whole time was pretty charged because it's kind of funny in a way now looking back, but my husband and I separated in 2019, and the lawyers were going back and forth and finally came to an agreement, which we both signed. And then COVID hit and the courts closed. So we couldn't go to a divorce, and ended up having one of the first Zoom divorces in the city of Washington.
Wow.
We were all on the television screens, like, what is it called? Hollywood Squares?
Yes, yes. Wow.
But that goes back into the history of meeting someone, falling in love, a lot of good years, and then some breaking points. And I think I've told you about an accident I had and losing an eye, and it was sort of the beginning of the end. But I moved to Rhinebeck for a couple of years during COVID, and I wrote 2 books while I was here because you couldn't go out. There was no vaccines yet. Yeah. So, but for writers, in a way that was life-saving, because I could really, really think about the next topic and the research. And so the next topic was artscapes, ekphrastic poems that go back to my college years. Excuse me.
And we spoke about that in our very first interview.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. And I loved doing that book, and I loved working with the publisher, Christine Coate from Shanti Arts. So the last 3 books she is publishing, including Artscapes, Soulscapes, and the next one is Colorscapes, which I can tell you about.
We'll circle back to that, because I want to talk a little bit more about your childhood. It was unique and idyllic, really. You grew up in France and India. You moved back to the States permanently when you were 14. And while you were overseas, you were exposed to a myriad of cultures, faith, spirituality, and belief systems. How specifically has that beautiful background influenced your writing?
Substantially, because one of the things that you learn by living overseas is how important it is to be a global citizen, and if not learn all the languages you're exposed to pay attention to them, the sounds. And then furthermore, the other senses like taste, smell, hearing. Often I was in a situation where I was the only white person, or I was the only stranger, but I became very, very aware of body language. And so I think I have a kind of a very broad intuition about how people move and what they're thinking and what their eyes are saying. That affected me a lot. And then my parents were very adventuresome, and sort of a mix of religion in my family. My father was third generation Unitarian. My
Okay.
mom is. I married, my first husband was Catholic. My second husband was Jewish.
Wow. Wow, you have been exposed.
I'm a mutt, but that
I
was
love
one of
it.
the I wanted to write Soulscapes because I do have an appreciation for all kinds of gods, Hindu gods, Greek gods, thoughts about the universe that go way back, into Native American culture and, often involves sun, moon, animals, water.
All of which is in your poetry. You refer to yourself as both a rational skeptic and a believer in things unexplainable by logic. I love that quote. What can we learn to appreciate from Soulscapes, and why is your poetry specifically needed by both skeptics and true believers?
Well, I think especially during hard times, during war, during political unrest, during disease, people are looking for ways to think larger, to think outside their own world. And I think poetry, because it has abstraction and because it has hope, often can be dark, but I think it allows people to dream, to hope, to write their own stories. As you read poetry or as you hear poetry in performance, what I've learned and what I think is really true is that listeners and readers are thinking up their own lives and their own stories and essentially are writing their own poems in silence.
Do you think poetry is having a moment in our culture right now?
I do. I do.
Why?
And well, we talked about this a little bit before, but I think that music, rap culture, performance art uh, have had a huge effect on young people. And not only are they intrigued by it, they are getting really, really good at um, competing with each other, memorizing lyrics, getting on stage and projecting, and they have messages to tell us. And I think in a way it's like poetry. The lyrics can be very compressed. They have to use words carefully. And then there are wonderful institutions who are still promoting literature and poetry, and like the Poetry Foundation and the Aspen Institute and the Kennedy Center. And we pray that all those places continue.
I hope so. You talked about observation. You said you do a lot of staring. You stare at a lot of things. Why is observation so vital, particularly for a poet?
Well, just looking at something, whether it's an artwork or a person or a blanket or a bird, there's so many things to discover more than your first glance at it. Is it wide? Is it narrow? Is it dark colors? Is it mixed colors? Does it have a smell? Does it have an attitude? And all of a sudden, you find these phrases and words to scribble down in a notebook. And then you can go and do research and talk to other people. I love to be on the street and just listen to phrases, or in a coffee shop and pick up things that people are saying. Sometimes they are just beautiful metaphors or similes for something, that is very odd from what they're comparing it to. And that makes for good poetry.
What is the most significant guidance or piece of advice that you received from other poets and artists that helped you hone your craft? I know you said that you learned so much when you were 68 and you began going to the poetry workshops. What was the most profound thing that you took away from all of this, and that you still might be taking away?
Oh, absolutely. And I can tell you exactly. First of all, I studied from so many different types of poets, both in Washington, New York, Iowa, California. And that was important because they brought regional consciousness to the table.
Mm.
Um, but I think the most helpful thing, besides being introduced to the Western canon of poetry and the Eastern canon of poetry, that I was taught to do skeleton poems. And what that means is take poets that you love or poets that you wonder about. I always ask people, what do you notice? What do you wonder? And what sticks with you? What do you remember? And so picking a favorite poem and looking at it, is it free verse? Is it a villanelle? Is it a haiku? And why? What content serves what form? And then figuring out how that poet did that poem. And not using the same words or the same theme, but taking a theme of your own and doing the same syntax, the same number of syllables, the same amount of metaphor, the same amount of colors or people or not people. And your ear starts to tune up in a magnificent way. And then you learn more about how to figure out those puzzles yourself.
Of all the, I know you do free verse, and you also do follow other types of poetry. Is there one particular poem in the series of the 5 beautiful collections that you've penned that resonates the most with you?
Ha.
That's a tough one because there are so many, but is there one that you just think about, Lee, that really just, wow, it started it all?
For Soulscapes?
For any of them, all the collections, really. Is there one that really stands out for you? If you want to just focus on Soulscapes, since that is what we're talking about.
No, no, no. I'm happy to do anything you want to do. Let's see.
You know, you said that someone recommended that you write a memoir. Really, all of these collections are memoirs in many ways.
They do have a lot of biography, but also what I have been taught to stay away from is everything me, 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 me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You start to use words that are emotional words without using specific images that are better at saying those words.
And that's a great piece of advice for aspiring poets.
Yeah.
What about women? I want to talk about women in poetry. You obviously have had a huge impact on the poet community. As a woman, what would you recommend to young women out there who are aspiring, who are struggling? How should they go about it? Where should they get started?
Well, I think taking classes is primary.
To learn the craft, not just start to just really learn the craft.
Learn the craft. Really, really read a lot of poetry, both old and contemporary, because contemporary poetry is completely different than traditional poetry. And a lot of that comes from the kind of writing we do for social media, short tweets, short emails. People don't pick up the phone anymore and have the same kind of conversation that we used to. So that brings about a different kind of poetry. And a lot of contemporary poets are playing with the disposition of words on the page. So you might find a big gap between words or strange punctuation, caps, no caps. And I think talking a lot about the big issues that are on people's minds right now, LGBTQ, women's lack of pay equity, um, political political differences. I mean, we are really living in a very, very troubled time right now, and not just in our country, but in the world.
In the world.
So they are thinking about that a lot, a lot, a lot.
Lee, how do you think poetry can change the way we interpret the world and also be a conduit for healing?
A lot of it is really paying close attention to nature and not feeling like there are humans on this side and trees and plants and animals on this side. We are all in one in the universe. And I think that's so, so, so important.
In Soulscapes, you do bring all of those elements together.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I do have a favorite. It's not about women, it's about an animal.
Lovely.
About a spirit animal.
Let's hear it.
So elephants are spirit animals in India, seen as very precious and important. So I will read.
And is this from Soulscape?
It is.
Okay.
It's from Soulscapes. I spent a number of days at the zoo and spent time with the zookeepers and the elephants and watched them be fed and watched them be exercised.
Again, observation.
Again. And then it brought up the bigger universe of what is happening to elephants and what a single elephant may truly feel. Here we go. Elephas Maximus. Matthew, my keeper, thinks he knows me. He reports, unlike most females who gather in groups, I choose to stand by the water hole alone, swaying side to side. Some might say I'm shifting my 5-ton body to be more comfortable, but I know the baby bull inside could take 20 months to emerge, swaying inside me, all 200 pounds of him. Matthew prepares 300 pounds of food a day for me, grass, tree bark, fruits, stems, and hay, bananas and jackfruit. He thinks I'm smart, very smart, recognizing myself in mirrors like dolphins and chimps, recognizing all the keepers who take good care of me, who say that I sway side to side for stimulation. Matthew says the motion keeps me cool and that I'm a good swimmer, seeing that I have a permanent snorkel thanks to my trunk. He invites visitors to guess my age by the telltale pink spots on my trunk and patches on my flapping ears. He's loyal and affectionate, spending hours making me push logs and roll tires for exercise, chopping carrots and sugarcane that I love. Matthew knows that at night I can lie down sideways, but during daytime nap hour can choose to stand, perhaps in a state of readiness to move on. Here is what Matthew cannot know, what I hide inside my brain. Memories of my mother, the matriarch who led us across the savannah, remembering how she taught us to bathe every day, spraying up water until completely clean, then spraying sand all over our hides so no sunburn could reach us, no insects could infest. She showed us how to swat away pests with a hairy loop of her tail. A newcomer to captivity, I retain memories of how I used my sense of smell to find year-old dried dung left by my mother near the grave where her herd buried her, a dart in her side. I sway because I could not pluck the deathly needle from her lumbering body, spray dust in the wound. These are just dreams now, distant visions. I embrace my zoo quarters far from Gujarat with other orphans who could not survive alone. When I blink my long eyelashes, the keepers who toil to know us thinks it's to keep bees from stinging. But Matthew may know it is to hide my tears. I sway, and for him, my favorite, I stop to wrap my trunk gently around his bony ankles.
Wow, what a picture that paints. I I can visualize every single thing that you described, every single emotion. Why that poem?
Spirit animal. And also because I do think that there are people who work with plants and animals and plants and trees. They've learned so much about how trees communicate with each other around through different kinds of growth and mushrooms and creatures. And it's not so crazy or woo-woo to think anymore that bumblebees don't communicate with each other to wag their behinds and tell each other where the good flowers are, that birds alter their sounds to warn other birds of danger. So there are so many things when you learn about the ocean and the tides and the moon and the grass that just they make me feel very humble and also to keep staring.
Observation. Lee, you're a museum pioneer. You're a former manager of multimedia and an executive producer at the Smithsonian Institution, just to name a few of your roles, where you did radio and television and you produced a variety of programming. How did these accomplishments help preserve our cultural history?
Wow, in such big ways. The people who work in those museums, both Library of Congress and Smithsonian, are such specialists, and they spend lifetimes observing whether it's birds or Asian art or how to conserve a sculpture or astronomy. And oh my gosh, the discovery of the James Webb Telescope and how that has changed our outlook on not only our world, but on the universe and these belong beyond. One of the books at the end of Soulscapes is 100 billion Big Bangs that talk about how little we know on Earth, but how these scientists and artists and anthropologists in museums teach us. And it was such an honor for me to work with them to come up with topics that we thought would be accessible to the general public. And then they want to tell everything about their topic.
Of course.
And I would have to compress, find the right combination of information to do within the time frame of a radio show or a television show or a film.
And in a way that the rest of us who are not specialists in that field can comprehend and really grasp what they're talking about.
Absolutely.
Not an easy feat at all. And we thank you for that.
Oh, thank you.
It's amazing. So one single word that encapsulates Lee Woodman and her poetry.
I would say persistence and whimsy.
I would agree with that. Persistence and whimsy. That's 2 words, but we'll let it slide. So, okay, so you've done 5 collections in the series, and you mentioned it earlier on. There's a 6th collection to be published this year, 2025, Scapes. Tell us about that, Lee.
Oh, this was so much fun. Well, I have 2 art degrees, and besides just loving smells and sounds, I just adore color. And I thought, what in the world would you want to write poems about color? How to go about that? And I thought, well, the sources of color are absolutely fascinating, going way back to Egyptian times, mud, rocks, shells, and then coming up into the Industrial Revolution, the use of different chemicals to change colors in paints and fabrics and so forth. So many of the poems are about sources, but I try not to make them too professorial. I want to relate that source material and lift it up into the aesthetics and the psychology of color. And there's been so many studies about psychology of color. And as you know, hospitals are painted in certain colors for certain reasons. Certain cultures think red is good luck. Others think black is death. Others think white is death. So there's a really, really interesting range of understanding of color in that way. And then because I love artists and I love acrostics, I went and looked at a lot of different new work, not necessarily contemporary, but some contemporary, some older, to read about the search for yellow by Van Gogh or the search for blue by Yves Bleu and purple. I mean, purple in Greek times was made from milking sea snails, and it took something like 200,000 snails to make 1 ounce of purple dye.
Wow. I love the I love that part of it, but I also like the psychology of color. I thought that was really fascinating. Which color, purple is fascinating. Which other color did you discover something that just blew your mind?
Well, silver was one because colors are grouped in families, and silver, even though metallic, was grouped in the family of white. And so,
Makes sense.
so I studied that and how it's been used in technology and dentistry and other things. And I wrote silver as a persona poem, as if silver were speaking the poem.
You have that poem handy for us? Can you read that to us, Lee? I'd love to hear that. Just a little teaser for Colorscape.
Okay. Because I don't have the book yet, I had to print this out for you.
Thank you. When will Colorscapes be published?
Well, we're working on it now. It takes about 9 months for or the publishing and the editing to go back and forth, for me to get blurbs from poets for the back and the front cover, for us to choose the cover. And then there's a whole printing process, getting the ISBN number from the Library of Congress, and starting a marketing plan. And you know how interested I am beyond craft in marketing poetry. And a lot of I learned from radio and television. Excuse me, I have a little bit of a sore throat.
No problem.
Okay, silver. Silver is more than a color. I am silver. Who are you? Are you intuitive and insightful too? I am silver, symbol of purity, a precious ore of color that's sparkly. Included in the broad family of whites, at heart, I'm introspective and bright. Not a dull shade of gray like platinum, nor am I gunmetal, chrome, or aluminum. A gleaming element when added to oil. I help artists to reflect light like foil. My versatility is prized in technology, used in touchscreens, circus, and dentistry. And antimicrobial, I fight infection. Worn as a bracelet, aid flu prevention. I am silver, feminine in quality, aligned with the moon, a celestial body. I am silver, refined and sleek, the color of grace, a hint of mystique. I'm silver, ductile and malleable, willing to change, soft and flexible. I am metal with flair and fortitude. I'm more than a color. Call me attitude.
Wow, that was great. I cannot wait to see the rest of read the rest of Colorscapes. That is really something to look forward to. Thank you for sharing that with us. So that's number 6. Anything beyond that?
Well, actually, you and I, when I was doing Artscapes, I was starting to work on something called Screenscapes. And not having had a television in India, my sister and I were just glued to Voice of America on Radio Ceylon, which would now be Radio Sri Lanka. And when we visited our grandparents on home leave, they had televisions, and we were crazy about Mickey Mouse Club and Queen for a Day and Art Linkletter. And then I got thinking, it's kind of ironic after coming back to the States and majoring in art that I got so interested in radio and television and became a television producer. And then when I decided to retire, it was time when series television just hit its heyday. And between all the cable and streaming, and there are just fantastic TV series. So now I'm a binger.
Join
So yeah. So I think that kind of history of television through the eyes of someone who had sort of 3 different experiences with television. And there's so much to tell of history too. The first television program I ever saw was John F. Kennedy's inauguration, and then later years, the assassination, and then going through, oh my God, it goes all the way up to the insurrection on January 6th, a couple years ago. So it's a hard book to write, but that's what I'm working on.
Is this series collection rather taking you the longest to complete?
Soulscapes took me the longest so far, but that was partially because I had moved back to DC and had to do all that moving stuff, but also because I thought it would be very controversial, and I didn't want to come across as saying, here's what you have to think about a way of knowing religion or faith or spirituality. I didn't want to do that at all. I just wanted to invite people to enjoy along with me a bit of witchcraft, a bit of tarot, a bit of past lives, and so I think it does that. You can tell me, but I don't think it comes across as proselytizing.
No, not at all. Not at all. In fact, all of these Scapes collections, they all give us an insight into a little bit of your life, your experiences, and things that you've learned along the way. And thank you for that. And really looking forward to the Screenscape. That sounds particularly fascinating. I just love it. So we've learned so much about you, about your past. You've accomplished so much in the art world and beyond. What is something that you can share with us, Lee, that would shock us, that we would be surprised to know about you?
I'm a registered clown.
Wow. Okay, that I was not expecting that one. Do you perform?
No, I used to, and I was a dancer when I was my mother was a ballet dancer. She had a school in India, and then she invited a modern dancer to come and teach. And then she and I studied traditional Bharatanatyam, Indian dance. But why did I go there? You asked about surprises. Oh, well, then I came back to the States and I studied modern tap, mime, clowning, because they're all different ways of movement for different ways to present yourself to an audience. And clowning to make people laugh and feel light is very, very different from delivering certain kinds of darker subjects. I just, I liked choreography the best of everything. So, I was a decent dancer, but I wasn't a dancer that was going to be on, the main stage. And so I have found ways to weave choreography into my poetry. And my dad, most proud of my clowning certificate, because I went to clowning school and I went through months of, learning all the different kinds of clowns and learning how important the costuming is and the faces and to, it's just not willy-nilly. You don't just put on red shoes and a nose and do what you want to do. And I found that historically really interesting too.
Well, when you described yourself as persistent, I think that was a very accurate description of you. This was really, really fantastic. In a short sentence, what is your vision and what is your goal for the Scapes series?
Well, I want it to reach people. I want it to make them think about their own lives. I want them to feel brave and free. And this is time we need to speak out, and poets and visual artists tend to do that during very, very difficult times. And I think what I'm hearing from readers and people who come to performances is that it is such a relief, and they have an opportunity to think about other things than anxiety and fear and pass it on. Be part of a good community.
Well, thank you so much. This was so wonderful, Lee. Lastly, where can our listeners find out about Lee Woodman and purchase your Scapes collection?
Such a generous question and easy. My website is www.poetleewoodman.com. Has everything. It has background. It has a page on each book. It has information where each one can be bought. It has, I've included a lot of radio and video recordings now because I seem to like to hear and see. And I invite people to join a mailing list in case they want to be on my regular posts, which I do. I don't try to do them too often. I don't do a blog, but I do like to keep people in touch, both on my own guest list and website, but on LinkedIn and Facebook as well.
That's wonderful. Thank you. So we will be visiting again in May at Book Camp, where you will be speaking, and we appreciate that. Looking forward to seeing you. It's always a pleasure.
I'm delighted. And Gabby, you and Ted are just doing so much for writers and publishers and distributors. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Lee. You all make it worthwhile, and we do appreciate all of you and all your hard work. Join us next podcast when we speak with author Michael Dow about his children's educational series, Nurse Lauren. This is your hostess, Gabby Olczak of the Gab Talks. Until next time, keep on reading.